Welcome to Seb's Garden, aka the Three Dreams demonstration plot.
Yeah.
So before we get carried away,
No problem.
no worries. I just want to go over just why do you like? What is the purpose of your garden? Like, you put a lot of time and effort into your garden. What are the things that you like? What sets your garden apart from other people's garden? What is your future plans? Tell me your vision. Like, what is your mantra? Pretty much. What's your mantra?
Slow and steady is one of the mantras. You know, I never try to do like huge sweeping changes ever. It's always just like slowly integrating things, seeing if they work, testing. It's like a constant troubleshooting, I guess. So learning is is the biggest goal. Learning as much as possible about different types of plants, how they grow relative to other plants around them. And so just gaining experience and a comfort level so that I can communicate all that to someone who might be interested in something similar. I guess the difference between this and a regular garden would be, I don't know, that it's very diversified. It's more diversified than most gardens, than what most people want. You know, most people want like their flowers, their rudbeckias, their hydrangeas. You know, they don't really give a crap about fruit trees or nut trees or anything like that. So, and then I also, one thing that I've focused on is like trying to produce things that I would otherwise have to buy to maintain the property, like comfrey, right? That can act as a fertilizer. So instead of having to buy a fertilizer, I can just harvest the comfrey, use it as mulch, or make a comfrey tea, and then fertilize, right? Same thing with like the nettle, or yeah.
So you're a huge advocate of using what's around you, using the herbs and things that some farmers may not like. Like, for example, comfrey could be, viewed as not an invasive species to the garden, but just an invader, because you're not trying to eat the comfrey or the burdock. I remember you were talking to me about burdock.
Yeah.
But that burdock and that comfrey, they break up that soil for you, and they basically unlock the otherwise unreachable nutrients. And if you harvest it properly, you can reintroduce those nutrients back into the soil.
Yeah, I mean, like, and just using plants that like will continue to grow without me caring for them, you know, like clover. Planting clover as a ground cover is just going to naturally feed the soil, because every time we cut the clover down, it's just going to cycle nitrogen back into the soil and cycle other organic matter back into it. So, and like using what's growing here, you know, like when it comes to leafy greens and spinach, we have three things that grow here no matter what I try to do, no matter how I try to stop them: garlic mustard, lamb's quarters, dandelion. They will all grow here no matter what I do.
I would like to do a piece on that, actually.
Yeah,
on those different herbs that you think, because the thing is, sorry to cut you, but what people can do is maybe find a way of picking out the herbs that are edible, and knowing those different herbs that they don't have to necessarily remove.
Yeah. Maybe
plant them in a different way, because the thing is, we're in a particular zone 5A, and we have to maintain the equilibrium, if you will. You know, you don't want to introduce too many random things that are not natural, like variances. Like, a lot of people say, oh, I just want to have tulips. I'm gonna have a tulip garden. This tulip garden is gonna be here, but they're like, oh, my tulips didn't last all year round. It's like, well, that's not how tulips grow.
Exactly.
And maybe if you introduced plants that, you know, either provided extra nutrients to your soil during those dormant stages, like nitrogen fixers, or things that store things, like you said, the comfrey is the dynamic accumulator, and it accumulates nutrients, and then you can mulch it, or cut it, harvest it in a way, and introduce those nutrients back into the soil. This is something that I feel like people need to know.
Yeah.
And you live in Montreal, and you live in St.Henri, or near St.Henri, but people don't know that in this concrete jungle you have this oasis. So another question I have is, how do you feel like, how did you terraform your property? Like, what are
How did I what?
Terraform it. Like, how did you reintroduce and manipulate the soil? Or, because let's say, I remember in the past it was a parking lot, right?
Yeah.
So how did you do that? How did
Well, with especially like in a city and in St.Henri, where there was a lot of like toxins that are in the ground, there's lead, you don't want to plant directly into really compacted, especially rocky soil. Like, you can see all the byproducts of construction, when you dig deep into the soil. But yeah, so building on that soil is important. So, when we made the lasagna beds, where you put the cardboard and then a nitrogen-rich element, which in our case was the horse manure, and then on top of that, we just did that. I think we did leaves that first time. We just had like leaves that we collected from the property, right? So just that, even one layer of both of those things is going to build, X amount of soil. And if you can do like 2 or 3 layers of each, then that's just going to build even more and more soil, so that when you're ready to plant into that, it takes a long time to build soil. I don't know what, in like a naturally occurring systems, they say it takes like, I don't know how many, like 500 years or 1,000 years to build like an inch of topsoil or something like that. Obviously, in environments like this, where you get like a ton of decomposition, especially if you're like concentrating it in certain areas, you could probably build it a little faster than that. But yeah, I mean, that's the idea, is like, try not to plant directly in an area that is toxic. Build on top of it, and if you have to do raised beds with like a membrane so that the roots never penetrate that area, then that is an option. I haven't gone that route of like testing the soil for toxins, but just knowing that we're in an area that has had toxins, it's prudent to just build up.
Are you feeling that these toxins are going to be present when you're eating them?
It depends. With tubers and other like root crops, yeah, it's probably more likely for any toxins that are already in the soil that they might be in there. So you got to be careful with those. That's why I haven't, whenever I've grown like potatoes or things like horseradish, where like I'm gonna eat, because comfrey, it has a deeper taproot than any plant here, but we're not eating the root, right? We're just like using its capabilities to break up the soil. Like the horseradish, which will break up the soil too, but it's also edible. It's like, all right, well, I'm gonna build that in as raised a bed as possible, so that I know that root's not penetrating to the area that I knew used to be like riddled with toxin, and a gas station. Yeah, so, and yeah, I'm probably taking a risk also eating it at all, because who's to say that the root isn't deep enough to like be penetrating into that area, even though I built it up.
So
the thing of it was like, especially like heavy metal, the plant will actually select a little bit because the weight of the elements. So a lot of time you have the most accumulated in the roots, and then the stem, and then the leaves.
Right.
Usually you have the most accumulation in the roots. So
right.
That's if you're having a root crop, that's the most riskiest part.
Exactly.
Yeah.
That's why things like, tomatoes and fruiting vegetables and leafy greens, you're less likely to have, if there are toxins in the soil, you're less likely, or the percentage is going to be a lot lower in the leaves and in the fruits. So that's why you're taking less of a risk, as Jerry said, when you eat those things. But
well, there's always like phytoremediation on it. You can always go on some of the plants below, and you're using heavy compost kind of practice.
Yeah.
A lot of time it will stabilize those things.
That's what I'm banking on. That the quality of the soil and organic matter that I'm consistently on, like, at least 2 to 3 times a season cycling back into the soil will slowly wash away the toxin. Not wash away, but stabilize the toxins, the level of toxicity in the soil, and have enough organic matter for the macro and micronutrients to be in large enough quantities for the plants to thrive.
No, but then you're also not consuming on those things on a big scale, right? A lot of time it's only just supplement for you. It's not really that much of a big risk. You're not really growing on a wasteland per se. I mean, if you're on the both side of Canal Lachine, I will, suggest against that. And you're not there. It's like,
No, exactly. But it's all about knowing a little bit, knowing a little bit about the land and its history, and then just trying to mitigate any risks that are there by like not converting this entire area to a potato farm and like creating a CSA with a potato farm, because then who knows, maybe like down the road someone could get sick. I don't know. It's just an unnecessary risk.
Yeah.
I mean, that in mind, like I said, there's so many factors just to consider when you're gardening. I mean, obviously, this is like I said, the first question I asked you is, what do you want to do? What's your end goal for your farm? Just to revisit that, so you just said you wouldn't make a potato farm. So what is your purpose? What do you have such a beautiful oasis here?
Yeah, the purpose is definitely on a personal and professional level, to learn and experiment and use this as like a laboratory. That's one. And then two is as like a very like micro scale nursery. So with that diversity, trying to propagate as many plants, or attempting to propagate without killing the plants as much as possible, so that I could just learn how to do it, and then once I feel like I've mastered the technique for as many plants as I can, grow out a nursery and have enough stock that I can actually sell it retail or use it in designs with clients. That's really the dream, but I can only do so much on this space, not just because of its size, but mainly because of my relationship to it, in so far that I'm a renter and not an owner. That's like the biggest obstacle, I think, is I would do a lot more if I didn't think that there was some risk that someone with much more decision-making power than me could completely wipe out.
That's big. That's another sense of permanence in, gardens and plants itself. Once life is established, it wants to stay, it wants to procreate, and as someone who contributes to that, it's hard to, advance your garden prowess if, like you feel like you're limited, you won't be able to see your experiment, like you said, all the way through. So I understand that is a limiting factor for all of us, because a lot of us in urban areas are renters. So
that being said, though, it's better to do something and apologize for it than to like not do it at all for fear that it won't happen. You can do so much in small spaces, and this is a relatively small space, big space in the context of a city, but relatively small space in the context of like agricultural spaces. But you can still do so much here, and like there's still so much yet to be done here. There's still like, this is always a work in progress. It always will be, and that I could probably say that for any land that I will ever own in my life. It'll constantly be a work in progress, but that's because like nature's never done evolving, just like we are never done evolving. We're never done growing, we're never done changing and like adapting to our circumstances. So like, especially in the context of me experimenting, there's always going to be like a wider variance in the push and pull of what works here. What do I want to work in X space, and what will nature tell me does or does not work in that space? And that's part of the learning process. The idea is to like learn and test at a small enough scale that it doesn't like completely derail your operations if there's something that doesn't work out. And that's what like permaculture and really offers, because there's so many different ways you can go with it. There's so many different things you can try out. You can like, specialize in water management systems and flood management, or you can specialize in building soil and composting. Vermicomposting could be like its own business, I mean, creating high concentrated fertilizer compost tea, vermicompost tea. As you guys know, there's a really precise process into creating a good product, and doing that at a scale that it can be profitable. It's like, that's a whole business in and of itself.
Yeah, it's all about, the only thing that I think all farmers need to find is the demand. We can create, if once your craft is perfected, You have to make sure your demand is there, and then if you do have the demand, you have to make sure you can fulfill the demand. So there's always that. I mean, like I said, everyone has their purpose for their garden, and it's interesting to hear that there are local scales that are willing to be producers, be people for people to consume. So it's interesting. Like, we need to know, like, 'cause this is something that people can use as a job. It is something that is kind of lost in society. We've kind of pulled away from that, and I feel like in general, meeting people like you, we can start connecting with people who have that knowledge and say, how can you make this a lifestyle in an urban area that's not like just for someone who lives in a faraway place. And even those people, they don't have it easy, because when they have their large lands, they have to tend their land either with machinery or personnel. So there's so many different ways. Scalability of urban agriculture, or agricultural in general, I think is the mission.
And the context, it can vary so much from one place to another that like a solution in this context isn't going to work for that context. And like knowing how to be adaptable is really important. And I don't know, I mean, the other part that's really interesting is like that it's not linear when it comes to thinking about systems like these and all the possibilities of like business opportunities, teaching opportunities. It's not linear. It's not like, oh, I am a permaculture business, so I do this. It's like, well, no, I can do like a ton of different things. You're a doctor, you obviously do a lot of different things, but it's like it's like very linear, right? It's like I go to school, I have to go to med school, I have to go to do a residency and this and that. And not to say that one is better than the other. It's just because it's not linear, it doesn't fall into a traditional like trajectory of how people think like a business or an idea can develop, because it's so like holistic in what it does. It's kind of hard to conceptualize for a lot of people, and that's why sometimes it's hard to explain like what it is, what it is you do. It's like, well, I'm not a plumber, I'm not gonna like, I don't have to like fix, it's like, I don't know, maybe I'm not giving like really good examples, but just like
a good example.
Very particular like trades of what you do, like you fix certain things, you do certain things, and like there's so much value to becoming an expert in that. But like with this, you can kind of do everything and only one thing, as long as you are always like testing and evaluating and making sure that like some things are going to be more viable as a business or less viable as a business. But it offers you that opportunity that I don't think most industries offer you. I don't think you can be non-linear in a lot of industries. I mean, maybe that's ignorant to say.
I don't know. I mean, that was a very deep thought. Not gonna lie there. I mean, as someone from, like, I work with hydroflora, and what we've come up with is being able to use agriculture for engagement and how can I say, marketing purposes. Like, we've kind of heightened those senses early on, and by doing that, we've kind of learned everything else into play. Because we could draw people in.
That's a big thing that you guys do. That like you guys get people really interested in like agriculture and growing anything. Like a lot of people that you wouldn't have expected to be interested. So like that work of getting people, like getting them a little that light bulb going off, that like green light bulb, is super important, because again, it's like where they can go in so many directions with it, but without that first kind of push, they'll just like see it as this nebulous concept of like, oh well, I can't really be a part of that, I don't know what that is, it's too difficult, I don't have a green thumb.
Yeah, you gotta understand, that's the mission.
So thanks a lot for coming by. Thank you for being here.
Thanks for having me, man.
Yeah, it was a pleasure. So just know that your system, you always got to keep experimenting, keep doing your thing, seeing what works for you. Thanks again.
Hey, and see us in the future with more videos. We're going to be traveling all around Montreal. We're going to be going to Rosemont, Petit Patrie, all these places. I got to practice my French for some of these places, but don't worry. Je travaille, nous allons. Whatever that means.
Tabarnak.
Exactly.
Tabarouette.
Testing. What's up? We're at Chez Langevin. We're gonna check out what we're looking at today. Some fruit trees that we planted yesterday, as well as kind of what we've been building over the past 6 years. So I'm gonna take a little walk through.